All right, everybody, welcome to the Smashified panel. I know the thing says Smashified Live, but this is nothing like Smashified live streams that we do on our channel that we started a year ago and then neglected for, I think, a year, almost a year. So sorry about that. We're going to finish Toad eventually, just in case any of you care about that. But anyway, so this is Smashified, and I am RT Omni, and I'm just going to do a quick introduction of everybody else here. This is Chris.
I'm Chris Sheschel. Hey, everybody.
He is the co-lead of the project and also an artist. And this is Andrew. He is one of our 3D generalists, and he's also an artist. Then we have Michael. He's one of our musicians. And then we have Nathaniel Platier, as he likes to be called. He is also a musician. And then last but not least, we have Sean, who is also one of our artists. So today we're going to be taking a bit of a closer look at the sort of art process that we do on our videos. It's going to be a lot deeper than we can get in those typical 10 to 12 minute videos. So after the process, we're going to talk about, well, we're not going to talk about, we're going to just do a Q&A after that. So what is Smashified? How many of you guys are familiar with our work? Okay, so most of you. All right, so let me just talk about how we got started a little bit. Back in February 14th of last year, I started a project just by myself, and it was this. I don't know if you remember this.
Anyone remember that?
But after this happened, it kind of blew up way bigger than I ever anticipated it would. So it occurred to me that maybe I wouldn't be able to do a project at this scale by myself. So I got in contact with this guy, and we decided to make it a collaborative project. And over time, it just grew to a team of 7 people. Unfortunately, one of us wasn't able to make it, but now we have a very large project that we've been working on for the past year and a half. So let me just, for the people who don't know what we are, let me just describe a little bit of what we do. We design and adapt characters into the visual style of Super Smash Bros. For Wii U. And this is sort of what that looks like. So these are all of the characters that we've done up to this point. And the first character there was Klonoa. We didn't actually do that as part of this project, but I did that, I think, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago maybe. And I was trying to pass that off as a fake as well, but it didn't work. It got debunked in 30 minutes, I think. So that didn't work out. But yeah, let me just let these go through. This is a lot slower than I thought it was going to be. My bad. Anyway. So, Smashified, we treat it as an opportunity to kind of break the rules of what it means to take a character and put it into Super Smash Bros. Because most of us have these ideas of what it means for a character to be able to be in the game. They have to probably be a Nintendo character. Third parties are very rare, at least it used to be. It's kind of been a little bit more of a thing now, but this presents an opportunity for us to just do whatever could happen, or couldn't happen, frankly. So a lot of the characters that we do, there's no chance that they would ever get into the game, most likely. But it's okay, because it's all about celebrating characters that maybe don't get celebrated enough. And it's also not a prescription or a prediction of what we think makes sense for any sort of Smash game. So a lot of people sometimes accuse us of doing characters that don't make any sense, but that's not what it's about. So, you know. The main vehicle for our work is these time-lapse art videos that we make. And basically we just compress the entire process of creating these characters into about a 10-minute or 12-minute video, sometimes a bit longer. And our focus when we create these is about character design. A lot of people ask us if we'd ever want to do mods for Super Smash Bros. And our answer to that is we're not really game designers, but we are artists, and we have ideas for what characters should look like. And a lot of times when we look at mods that are out there, we feel a little bit disappointed because they don't quite look as good as we think they should be if they were really in the game. So we want to make something that looks as authentic as possible. And it's also not a way for us to kind of express what our own artistic leanings are. When you're trying to create something in the style of something else, you just kind of have to put your own preferences aside and do what makes sense according to what the developers would do. So we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the developers as much as possible. So before we move on, how many of you guys follow us on Twitter? Okay, so for those of you who don't, what we like to do on Twitter is we like to give out these code names for characters that we're working on at the time, and every character gets a different code name. This character has been hinted at since, I think, September of last year. Is that right?
Probably right, yeah.
It's been a long time.
So we've been thinking about it for a long time, and I'm sure some of you might already know who it is based on the hints. But we're just gonna show something a little special for you guys here at the con. So,
Well, let's build it up for a second, though.
well, okay. What?
So, Codename character X is a very special character that we've been saving for this day specifically for that whole time, that whole year and a half. It's a character from my personal favorite video game franchise. It's a character I know a lot of people wanted to see in Smash. Maybe said he couldn't make it in Smash. And so we wanted to spend as long as we could to get this one just right. So we have a little something special to show you. It's not done yet, but we brought you a little something.
I knew he was going to do that. I got the news network.
Yeah.
So a lot of you might not know who this is. This is Ridley from Metroid.
Yeah.
He's just the right size for Smash Brothers.
He's not too big. He's not too big.
So let's talk a little bit about the approach we had to this. So obviously, Ridley is in Super Smash Bros. Wii U as a boss, right? And the iteration that they chose to use was the one from Metroid Other M. And so I think there's a lot of Metroid fans out there that weren't a huge fan of the visual appearance of Ridley in that game. So we wanted to try to see what we could do with like the quintessential Ridley. What do all of the Ridleys look like? Because if you look at every single game, Ridley looks so different from game to game. In the first game, he looks nothing like Ridley. And then in Other M, he looks so much more humanoid, and it's kind of, his arms are like 10 feet longer than his feet, or his legs, it's super weird. So we wanted to try to take the best elements of all of the different iterations of Ridley and put it into one quintessential Ridley. And hopefully we accomplished that. Obviously this is still a work in progress, but
pretty close.
It'll be out hopefully by the end of this month. And I'm sure people here are gonna leak it out. That's fine. It's I deserve that. So go for it.
Yeah. A lot of influence from the Super Metroid design. We wanted to stick to the classics, the better colors, anatomy. That's what I think of anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Hey Sean, you're an artist. Do you have any thoughts?
On really?
Yeah, this was
He
this was a
took
team
a
collaboration
wall to
with
make.
a lot of us.
That's all.
Like all the
That's
artists
fun.
working together. So Sean actually, this is his first time 3D sculpting anything, kind of.
Yeah, I learned ZBrush in like 3 weeks and I hurried up and jumped on it and helped him out with it. So I did like, I think the ribs, spine, and some other details did some fine tuning on. So we all pretty much just teamed together and worked on this, put all talents combined with it.
That guy's gonna leak it out, I can tell. Alright.
Oh, it's gonna get leaked.
Want to move on to the process?
Yeah.
Talk about it should be noted, I think this is the first character that literally all 4 of the artists have had some sort of contribution in, so it's a really exciting project for us. It was a big undertaking. Definitely the most complicated 3D character.
It was big, but it wasn't too big.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So let's go ahead and move on to talking about our process. How many of you guys in the audience are artists? Okay. So hopefully, are any of you maybe aspiring to become an artist? Maybe you're not really an artist, but you would like to delve into that arena. Hopefully this would give you a little bit of ammunition to some principles that you'd be able to apply to your own work. Um, so when it comes to character design, I think all types of design can be distilled to solving problems. You're trying to identify what questions you might have about a character and then try to solve them one at a time until you arrive at a result that is perfect, hopefully, or as close as you can get to perfect, which is you can never get perfect. Don't ever think you'll be perfect. So the initial step for any character we do is the planning stage. And this is the point where we start asking ourselves what those questions are. So first we ask, should it be 2D or 3D? Initially we did all of our stuff in 2D in Photoshop. We were just trying to fake the 3D appearance of these characters. But lately, since I started doing 3D modeling, I think all of us now have some experience in 3D modeling. So we might see more of a skew toward 3D in the future, but hopefully we'll still have some painting processes.
But there still will be a life for 2D on the channel, whether it be in Splatshine or other new things that come along.
Yeah.
We're not getting rid of 2D.
Yeah, painting will always be a thing on the channel. So the first question to ask is usually, what iteration of the character do we want to use in Smash? Because a lot of characters, they kind of get redesigned or reinvented through their own franchise. Like, look at a character like Fox. He's completely different in almost all of his games. So which character design did they use? And if we wanted to use a character like Crystal, for example, what iteration of Crystal would we use? So there's another question, what franchise does the character belong to? Usually, if the character is in a franchise that's already in Smash, then you can just kind of take that as a precedent. Star Fox, all of the characters were generally based on Star Fox command, so we thought it made more sense for Crystal to be based on her command design. And even characters like that, they kind of take some artistic liberties with the characters. He's not exactly like the Fox in command. He's got some other more detailed aspects to him. So we also want to try to replicate those liberties as well. And so the question sometimes is there not a design that makes sense? In the case of Roy, they actually kind of invented a new design for him. There was actually a more recent design for Roy that they could have used on, after Melee, but they didn't. They actually kind of hybridized the design from Melee and the newer design from, I don't even know what game that Roy design was from, but okay.
Awakening, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's what you
yeah.
said, right? Awakening.
That's what I said. So in that instance, they kind of just created something that's sort of in the middle of all of those. Sometimes we also consider what moves the character might have, because in a case like Zero Suit Samus, for instance, they added those rocket heels because of all her attacks had these explosive rusty kicks that they wanted to add to the character. Who knows if that was really the motivation behind adding those shoes, but it happened. So sometimes you have to consider what the moves might be, what aspects of the character design would have to be there to accommodate those moveset ideas. So one of the things that we like to do is create a mood board for a character, and that's basically just a collection of references, past design iterations, ideas, basically anything that would get you in the mindset of what you want to create. Sometimes you reference fan art. We try to do that a little bit less, but sometimes you just reference all of the other games and see what the artwork looked like in those games. And let me give you an example of that. For Crystal, like we said, we wanted to look at all of the different iterations of Crystal and see what might make sense, what kind of elements we could pull from the Smash designs for Fox and Falco, and what elements we could pull from Crystal design in Star Fox Command. Following that, we didn't always do this at the start, but more recently, we started trying to create model sheets for all of our characters. And basically a model sheet is a comprehensive blueprint for a character's design. And so this is what we came up with for Crystal. And it took several iterations before we arrived at this final result. But we pulled some elements from the designs of Fox and Falco. We pulled a lot of shape elements from Command. Obviously the colors are more like Command. But we also tried to take some of the jacket elements from Fox and Falco, some of the shapes from Assault as well. So it really is sort of a marriage of all of these different designs. Here's one that we did for Masked Man from Mother 3, And when we're working with a character that only has sprites as reference, it's very difficult to try to come up with a design that extrapolates what those gigantic squares mean. So in this case, we had to look really deeply into how those pixels are placed. A pixel that moves one pixel over can make a giant difference in what the character design might mean for a character like that. You're laughing, Chris. Why are you laughing?
These are the problems we have. This is what we deal with.
And I mean, it's a lot of guesswork as well because you can't see like a 360 view of them either. So you have to kind of fill in the blanks with it as well. So
Yes, that's right. I heard you.
you can't hear me.
No, you said 360 degrees.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely helpful, especially when you're doing a 3D model like Masked Man was. So this is a character that we worked on pretty recently, Kumatora from Mother 3. And for this one, we didn't really know what a female Earthbound / Mother character would look like. All we have is Ness and Lucas, and their bodies are exactly the same, and their heights are exactly the same. So we had to ask the question, what does a female look like? But we don't have any references of Kumatora from Mother 3. We don't have any official artwork like they had with Mother 2. So what we did is we looked at Mother 2 and saw, what do females look like in that game? And so you have Ness's mom, you have this character named Venus, and you can kind of see that they're taller. They generally actually have a neck, unlike Ness and Lucas. So we tried to take those principles and apply them to Kumatora's design.
Yay.
So this is sometimes we like to merge the mood board and the model sheet stage. So we just have these collections of references as well as the character model sheet. We also call that a turnaround when you have those front, side, and back views. And for this one, we also had sort of a detailed drawing there in the left side to kind of get an idea of what it might look like when it's finally fleshed out. Because oftentimes with a character like Ridley, the head shape is difficult to really read from just the front. So you never see Ridley's head straight from the front because he looks like a turkey when you look at him from the front. It's kind of gross. So yeah.
Looks like a well-man chicken.
So the next stage, when it comes to 2D, is thumbnails and sketches. Now, thumbnails, when it comes to the world of art and design, are basically really small, really fast sketches. And the key word is fast, because you want to be able to try as many things as possible. When you did K-Rule, when we did K-Rule, Chris, you did all of the thumbnails for these, and you did a lot of different thumbnails. And the important thing is that it doesn't have to look good or polished. It just has to be an idea. You want to try to nail down what aspects of the character's silhouette would look like, what poses you might want to try. Do you have something to add to that, Chris?
Well, it's just like the pose of a character defines who they are. So like, you won't see King K. Rool doing a pose that Pikachu's going to do. So you have to get that sort of set down at first before you get into the nitty gritty of the textures and materials and all that stuff. Sketch is something you can spend a long time on. It's the groundwork for an illustration. So getting that right from the start is the most important thing. So that's why we spend so long on it.
Here's one that Sean worked on. This is Dixie Kong.
Oh yeah, the rough sketches.
And as you can see, usually sketches like these are very loose. They don't have to be clean. You can clean them up later. If you like a pose, if you agree on a pose, then take that pose, figure out what the problems are, and then continue from there. Any thoughts on that Dixie sketch?
Not really.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
This is one of our favorite characters, I think. The Inkling, character that we all wanted to be in the game. We were pretty sure that they were gonna be in the game.
Yeah.
It didn't happen, but I'm glad we were able to do this, especially right when Splatoon was really hitting its stride. And for a character like this, it's kind of challenging. They have a very large head in proportion to their body. They have these gigantic guns, so that's going to be an issue when it comes to creating a clean silhouette that reads well, even if the character is completely solid black or something like that. So that was a challenge. We tried a lot of things. For this character, I even got to the point where I had to take photos of myself trying to do all these poses, because sometimes you just can't find a good reference of a pose like that. So I think I hurt my leg.
Did you bring those photos? Or those
I
photos?
did not bring
There's
those
no
photos.
of you
No,
doing, no?
I did not.
Shame.
For this one, sometimes when we're trying to create a new sort of iteration for a character, it's good to kind of stipulate on what all of these smaller details are. When you look at a character like Mega Man, his design in Smash is mostly based on proportions of the NES sprite. So if you look at the promotional art of Mega Man, it's quite a bit different from the actual Smash iteration. So they added a lot of these details to kind of make it look to the same level of detail as a character like a Fire Emblem character, where they have a lot of small details. So for this one, we wanted to imply that Bomberman is a robot. Not a lot of people know that. Sometimes they think he's just a weird-looking astronaut in a really skinny suit. So we tried to figure out how would he hold a bomb if his hands are just balls. So we thought maybe there's a magnet on the inside of the hand, and the hand is actually malleable, like a silicone, like this kind of material or something like that. So that's some of the things that we think about. We thought maybe the little ball on the top of his head could be an LED, kind of like how a bomb has a wick that lights up. So all of these different ideas. Next in 2D are flats or vectors. Now for our process, I think I kind of started this and forced everybody else to do it. But we like to create vector shapes for all of the different general shapes of the character. And this is kind of what that looks like. So these are all vector shapes. And vectors are basically shapes that are not made of pixels, but are rather mathematical equations that represent different shapes. And they're all flat, and they can be resized or rescaled indefinitely, either small or large, and they'll never lose quality on the edges. They'll never see jaggies or pixelation like that. And generally, you have to think about how these stack up in sort of the z-axis, that imaginary z-axis that you don't see in 2D work. I don't know if there's much else to say about black colors. It's a pretty simple idea. But when it comes to what we use in Photoshop, we like to use clipping masks or just general masks, and just we're able to paint within those shapes without having to worry about coloring in the lines. So we don't have to worry about spilling over the edges. And in a moment, I'll show you a little bit of that process. So once we have that all flatted out, we have somebody do some shading and paint work on top of that. And here's an example: Crash Bandicoot, which was mostly Sean painted this one.
Yeah.
So we have the flat shape there, and then we just sort of start adding details, start faking that three-dimensional aspect. And it takes a long time to make it look like it's actually 3D. Sometimes it doesn't even reach the point where it looks quite convincing. I know a lot of people who are really understand 3D work. They're not super convinced that our 2D work is 3D, but we try to get as close as possible. I think this one actually turned out pretty close to 3D looking, would you say?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
But that's our last 2D one we did.
Yeah,
correct?
that was.
Been a while.
We've been doing a lot of 3D ever since I started. One of the great things about trying new things like 3D is that when you force yourself to take on a project that you don't really understand, you learn so much faster. And I only started doing 3D work at the start of this year, but I've learned so much, and having all these other people that I can ask questions with, it really helps you learn quickly. So don't be afraid to ask people who are already good at something what they do, even if you feel like you might be bothering them. It doesn't matter. All that matters is you try to improve as fast as possible and do whatever that takes. And if the person you're asking is cool, then they'll be more than happy to try to help you out. And if they're not cool, then whatever. Forget about those people.
Move on to the next person.
What?
I don't know.
What?
Too bad. So now we're going to shift over to the 3D processes. Now with 3D, it's a very different, very involved process. It's a lot harder to do. There's a lot of specialization that usually occurs when people create 3D models for actual games. So a lot of this is trying to wear as many hats as possible. So for a base sculpt, here's an example of that. This is actually not for a character that we ever did for Smashified, the main series, but this was a trophy. So this is Chris doing a 3D sculpt in ZBrush. Do you have any specific thoughts on that process?
Well, I don't know if anyone out here uses ZBrush, but it's basically like taking Photoshop into the 3D world. It's like sculpting clay. It's super organic, and it's super fun. It's just pushing blobs around, holding things, pushing, cutting, and it works really fast. So this base didn't take very long at all, and we already had that sketch, that preliminary concept of what the Drago would look like. So it was just a matter of filling in this base.
Now, when you do a sculpt like that, you end up with a model that has millions upon millions of polygons. And I don't know if you guys know how many polygons are in a typical game model. It's usually around, in Smash, it's around 20,000. That Mega Drago model had, I think, 14 million. So that's not usable in the game if we wanted to use that in the game. So, and it's also very hard to manipulate that further once you have the general details. So what we usually do is retopologize that. Now, topology is sort of a hard thing to describe. I was reading around to try to find a succinct definition of topology, and it's basically the flow and organization of polygon edges on a 3D model. And the reason that's important is because most models are made from squares, or quads as they're called in 3D modeling. And they generally end up becoming triangles by the end. But if you're working with triangles, it's a lot harder to create a flow of edges. And it's hard to describe why that's important. But when you're working, it's a lot easier to make changes when you can just... It usually, especially with 3D software, it really favors working in squares or quads. But also, when you're retopologizing, you're trying to create a low poly model that you could actually use to make sort of more controlled changes and potentially put in a game as well. This is something that we never showed on the channel. This was Kumatora's hair. It was initially sculpted, and so with all of that detail, we had to take it and retopologize it to create a low poly version, and then we could create textures and normal maps and things like that from there. So for this particular model or mesh, I ended up using a lot of triangles because it's hard to take these organic shapes and keep them flowing nicely using just squares. So there's a lot of triangles in this, but it's okay. If you look at Lucas's model, I don't know if you can get your hands on a Lucas model, but his hair is completely crazy. It's just nonsense. So I thought maybe I could make mine as nonsensical as that. So that's what it means to be authentic. When they're doing a bad job, you have to do a bad job. So that's just a joke. Now, when you have a low poly 3D model, you can start doing texture mapping, and that's what basically, when you have a model, there's no detail on it. It's just a flat color model, and it's represented with some solid color. So you have to start adding texture to that. And when you're trying to add texture, you actually use two-dimensional images to actually wrap. Basically, if you think about it like sewing or creating costumes, you have to kind of make these fabric patterns and then wrap those around a 3D form. But if you ever try to wrap a sphere with a flat piece of paper, it's not possible. You have to cut it up into weird shapes to be able to do that. Here's a simpler example. This is Kumatora's shirt, and you can kind of, I don't know if you can see it on that projector, but there's these red seams along the side of the shirt and also at the bottom edge of the sleeves. And that lets you create those three shapes that you see there on the left side of the screen. And once you have that, then you can start creating textures. So this was the texture sheet, I guess, texture map that we ended up with. And you can kind of see that the front and the back of the shirt and the sleeves underneath there, and it's basically just cut into a rectangle that's wrapped around like a tube. And then when you finally have a low poly model that's textured, then you have to rig it, and that process is basically creating a skeleton that the character actually uses for posing and animation if you're actually going to put it in a game. So rigging, you're actually taking bones and lining them up with the inside of the model. In this example, you can see through the model. It's what they call X-ray mode. So you can kind of see where the bones line up without having to be obstructed by the actual model. And the nice thing about what we use, this was Blender. That's the software that we use for this. It's free and open source. And there's this nice plugin called Rigify. And it gives you a pre-made human rig that you can just place into something and change the proportions. It makes it a lot faster to be able to rig. And then you can just generate a rig from that with actual controls that you could use for animation and posing. So that's pretty much it for process, I think. Do you have any other thoughts, Chris?
Who wants to see Ridley again?
I don't have a keyboard. I can't throw them back up.
What?
I can't go back.
You can go back.
How? What do you press?
We can go back. Okay, we'll get it back. But
We'll
you
put
wanna-
it-
let's
put it
move it
up
to
later.
Q&A.
Yeah,
Talk
okay,
Q&A.
so
We can always
Now-
announce Shrek now. If you want.
we're not
No,
putting.
Shrek.
We're
We
not.
have to go
We're not
back.
doing Shrek ever.
Never.
Are you ready for
Sorry.
Q&A? Yeah?
Yes, we're ready for Q&A.
All right. If you would go ahead and raise your hands, and I'll bring you a mic. Stand up nice and loud and into the mic so they can hear you. I'll start over on this side.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
So you seem so successful doing everything in 2D. What prompted the switch to 3D? I mean, I have a little bit of experience with 3D, and it's not an easy venture to dive into.
It's intimidating, that's for sure. It's not hard, but it's not easy.
You say it's not hard,
It's
but
not
it's
hard.
hard.
It's just a long-term commitment. You know, you got to marry 3D. You can't just take them out to dinner. You know,
I think for me personally, I was always a 2D painter, but when it came to like my future career plans, I've always wanted to be in game development personally. And these days, most like big name games are 3-dimensional these days. So just having a knowledge of 3D seemed like a good idea. And I never really wanted to do it for a long time. I think in the Shovel Knight episode, I even talked about how I opened Blender one day just to see if it was something I could try. Opened it up, and there was so many controls all over the place, buttons I didn't understand. It was frightening, and I just closed it immediately and never opened it ever again for several years. So you have to overcome that. If you see a program that you don't understand, find as many tutorials as possible and just learn it and commit yourself to really diving headfirst into that idea. But when it comes to why we wanted to go for Smashified, I think a lot of what we do in Smashified is a way for us to learn new things, and we've grown so much as artists just doing these projects. So I think that's a lot of the motivation for that change.
Is there another question? I'll take you right here.
Hi.
Hey.
So when you do those videos, you show it like a bunch of clips. I was wondering how long the whole process takes, and if some of those clips end up taking multiple days.
So the full processes are actually, and this is just what's recorded, the full processes are often 15 hours to 24 hours to more than that, and we have to compress it into 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So we're actually seeing something that's often like 15,000% normal speed. It's pretty crazy. But when you're thinking about the actual process from start to finish, including planning and design and things like that, it takes days or weeks to actually finish a character like that, and that's all in our spare time. This is not our day job, so it's a big commitment, but I think it's worth it. By the way, if any of you guys are musicians as well, we do have 2 musicians who have been working with us. So if you have any questions for them, feel free to ask them.
you're a musician.
I'm not a musician.
You're a musician.
I'm not a real musician.
He's getting up there. You're pretty.
All right, I'm going to come over here.
Hello.
Hi.
Besides all the characters in Smashified, who did you guys want to see win the ballad?
In the real game,
Ridley.
Really, sure.
There's literally no one else I voted for.
He deserves it.
so for me personally, definitely Rayman, obviously. I voted for Rayman in the ballot, just so it's official, to try to make up for my transgressions. But some other of my favorite characters are Bomberman. I think he's a real cool character, a really neglected character these days. I think he's owned by Konami now, so I don't know if we'll ever see anything from Bomberman ever again. But I'd really love to see Bomberman in Smash. I think he's a perfect fit. And also, another unrealistic idea is Klonoa. Hi, little fly. Klonoa is one of my fan favorite characters, and he makes no sense whatsoever, but he's just a really cool character to me. Do you want to go down the line and say what some of your ballot votes were, or maybe who you
The one
want?
that I voted for was also Bomberman. He was a very favorite character when I was a kid. Out of the Smashified characters, probably Bomberman as well. Non-Smashified Sora, because I'm a big Kingdom Hearts fan. And once Cloud got in, I was like, yeah, there's a chance, finally.
Definitely my favorite one that I wanted to get in so bad was Bonte from Zelda the Minish Cap and Tetra from Zelda Wind Waker, because we needed such we only have one Toon character in the Zelda series, and I really wanted another Toon character.
I think you all know already, but I really wanted Banjo-Kazooie because I felt like, well, I was a big fan of this game when I was little, and Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie were like some of the top titles on the Nintendo 64, so I was like, bring them back home. But but besides Banjo-Kazooie, I really wanted really into, because like, I feel like there needs to be more representation of Metroid in Smash Brothers, or maybe more representation of Metroid in general. I had that birthday a while back. I don't think it's gonna be much of a thing. But yeah, those are my top two choices.
Great. I'm going to come up to the front here.
So I really started taking my art seriously maybe a couple years ago, and I noticed a lot of the work you do seems like it's the result of lots of years of hard work and dedication. So my main question is, how was the what do you what were the best ways that you guys got your mileage, and how did you reinforce it?
Can you say that last part again?
How did you get your mileage in your artistic disciplines, and what was the best ways you reinforced that?
You want to think?
That's a really loaded question. Discipline. How do you get discipline? I mean, that's something you kind of have to build up yourself over time. A lot of artists sort of struggle with artist block, but you kind of have to figure out for yourself. It's just in your own head. And, you know, for me, it's a little bit of a competitiveness. I like being that guy who's making Ridley. It just takes, just time, years, practice, that sort of thing, that fire inside of you to say, I'm going to keep doing this, I'm going to get better at this, I'm going to study the people who've done this superbly, and I'm going to try to get as good as them. I'm going to reach out to everybody that inspires me and see how they got to that point. You know, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it's also a bit of that competitiveness. I think a lot of the things that I've ever done in my life, as far as art goes, is me just trying to one-up something that I saw on the internet. Like, I saw that there were no good-looking, realistic Pikachus on the internet, so I decided, I'm just going to make the perfect realistic Pikachu. And if you look up on Google images, real Pikachu, I'm really proud to say that my realistic Pikachu is the first result. So I feel like I accomplished that goal. But figure out what motivates you, figure out what keeps you trying new things, and then chase after that. Sometimes competition is paralyzing for some people. Like seeing people who are better than them is something that makes it harder for you to work. But in those instances, just understand that when you start doing something, you're going to be bad at it. And that's a good thing. If you're not making mistakes, you cannot grow. So make as many mistakes as possible and seek out people who will tell you what mistakes you're making. And that's the way you're going to start improving. And I think that's a really important idea. Don't be afraid of failure. Failure is just a step towards success. So,
I believe there was another question. Yeah.
Hi. Have you guys ever run into any problems with Nintendo?
to end bonds with Nintendo?
Haven't?
Oh.
No.
Yeah, no, I mean, not
Is there a
really.
secret story I don't know about or something?
I don't think so. No.
Nah.
We would know. We wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for the group? Right here?
So,
Hey.
it seems that you focus on you focus on the Smash 4 art style, but have you ever thought about doing styles in or art in this cartoony style of Smash 64's official art, or maybe the more serious art of Brawl?
in general, we've had a lot of different ideas of branching out from just doing Smash 4 style artwork. Even on the channel right now, we started a series called Splatshine, which is basically a marriage of Splatoon and Mario Sunshine, which are two games that a lot of people have seen similarities between those two games. I think with mostly the ink and paint idea. So we thought, what could we do to explore that concept? What could a game like that actually be, or what could DLC like that actually be? And I think there have been other ideas that run through our heads, like now that Breath of the Wild is a big hype thing right now, we might want to do something in the style of different Zelda games or things like that. So yeah, I think there's definitely interest in doing sort of anything beyond Smash, because we can't do Smash forever. Obviously, Smash 4 hype will end eventually. It's sort of died down already. The game's been out for a long time, and DLC is over. So it's not like we're trying to feed the ballot anymore. But there's always going to be something new to chase after, I think.
I think there was a question up front. Yeah. You want to meet me back so we don't get feedback. Thank you.
Well, hi.
Hey.
So, having your art, like with the Rayman leak that you did, what's it like having that much of an impact that the community thinks that it's real?
I can tell you what it was like the day it happened. It was scary. I got a lot of, not death threats, but death wishes. Like, I hope you trip on the sidewalk and scrape your knee. That was my favorite one. So, but yeah, it was very overwhelming. And that guy over there definitely didn't help. But yeah, it was definitely a very surreal experience. And I've gotten used to it at this point. Like, it very much has died down. And a lot of the people who are very angry with me are pretty much over it. In fact, a lot of people have stopped by our table in the vendor area and have said that they were mad at me, but now they're okay with it. So I'm glad that was the case, because that could have definitely gone a lot further south had I not maybe handled it the way I did. I don't know. Maybe I'm just lucky, but it's definitely kind of crazy.
Does anyone have questions? I've got two in the front. So in the gray, can you meet me in the center? And then in the black, we'll go next.
Have any other companies contacted you about making characters for Smashified like Galaxy Trails did Lilac?
Can you say that again?
In the Lilac episode, you mentioned how Galaxy Trails contacted you.
Yes.
Have any other companies done that?
Yes. There has been some other contacts, nothing that panned out, but there has definitely been some people who contacted us about certain things. Some smaller indie places, mostly.
Some bigger ones.
Some bigger ones, but we can't really
talk about it.
Yeah. So you don't have to finish my sentences.
He's gonna say sentences.
Hi.
Hey.
This is open to everybody. What is your personal dream place to be working at, and in what department, role, whatever?
So a lot of people obviously here are really big fans of Nintendo and obviously really big fans of gaming. Obviously I want to work in the game industry in some capacity, I think. And I think a lot of us would be interested in that if the opportunity arose. But for me, I think it's difficult to imagine myself as sort of a specialist, sort of like a cog in a giant machine like Nintendo. So I think my interest is sort of becoming an indie developer of some kind and trying to learn as much as possible to create projects as large of a scope as possible. But for me, it's definitely indie games. I'd love to be able to do that.
I think there's so many things I want to do, but I guess that the end goal would be to write different TV shows, like animated TV shows and movies, hopefully with my own company.
I mean, one of my things that I've always wanted to do, well, actually, like, I've always wanted to do two things. I've always wanted to do voice acting things, but the main thing, obviously, is that I've always wanted to make music for a AAA video game, which, who knows, that may happen, but I would love to make music for a AAA video someday. Who knows?
My dream is find something to omnis, just do like character concept art and stuff like that, or video games, or maybe even films too. And I also hope to be a teacher as well, so I'm attending this SCAD to try to get my master's degree so that way. Because from my background, I went for a bachelor's degree and like they taught no digital painting at all when I was at, and they didn't have anything to do like for the direction I wanted to go. So I want to become a teacher to help students that are going through those kind of similar situations and help them reach the kind of goals they want to teach them like digital painting and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays with indie developers, it seems like that's the way to go. Like Ami said, you don't want to be a cog in the wheel of Nintendo. It'd be nice to lead your own ship, I think. So maybe an art director or a owner of a company making games, probably. Games seem to be a pretty great place. I do a lot of movie work in my full-time job right now, and balancing that with games would be awesome, I guess. Yeah.
Honestly, it's pretty hard to decide. Everything in video games is pretty cool. It's all pretty even.
This guy is one of those guys who likes to try to create everything himself. He's a lot like me. He's doing a lot of stuff in Unreal 4. I don't know if a lot of you guys are familiar with Unreal Engine 4, but it's very approachable for trying to create projects if you're not necessarily a programmer. So, yeah, I think he and I are similar in that way. We like to do everything ourselves. So. Cool.
Right, is there another question? All right, then I think you guys wanted to show the video over again before you went.
I think they want us to do that.
I think everybody does.
Yeah.
So I guess,
Thank you.
so I guess that pretty much wraps it up. So thank you guys so much for stopping by at our panel. We really appreciate it. And if you want to come talk to us personally, we're going to still be at our table in the vendor area, pretty close to the front doors. So feel free to stop by and say hi.
Thank you guys so much. Big round of applause for Smashified. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, stick around in about 10 minutes.